I'm Lene Churches, and we're here at the Lowell High School Performing Arts Center to interview Ed Wabeke. Okay, Lene. Okay, when and where were you born?
I was born, according to this, I was born in October 25, 1926, and I was born to Edward Wabeke, which was the same name, only he was known, now he's known as Senior, only he's dead. And my mother's name was Gertrude. She was a Gertrude Crow.
Did you have any siblings?
I had 7 brothers and sisters. I had five boys and 3 girls. We were in all, with the 8 of us.
Were you the oldest?
I was the second to the youngest. I have 1 younger sister, and she's still living today.
When you were younger, as kids, where did you explore around the house?
Well, when we were kids, it was a way different world than it is now. And it was mostly neighborhoods, and we spent a lot of time by different houses, usually in the backyard. There were ball games, pick-up ball games, or games that we played in the evening. It wasn't like now where everything is video games and everything seems to be structured. Then we made our own games and we had our own good times. So it's a way different life than it is today.
Do you remember any special events?
Not really. I don't know. I guess there was. It was weddings, of course, with older brothers and sisters, but a lot of the time was just spent either working or playing. Well, my dad had a big garden, and we spent a lot of time in the garden. We spent a lot of time working there, pulling weeds, but we also had to go out and sell the produce. It wasn't a case where we had a fruit stand. We'd take a little 4-wheel cart and we'd go around the neighborhood, and we'd peddle a lot of the produce that we did work on. And it always made a little extra money that way for the family, because times weren't too good.
What other jobs did you do besides gardening?
Well, I started out when I was 16. I started in the grocery store. Before that, I had worked a few times in the field, weeding gladiolas. But my first real job was in the grocery store, stocking shelves, making deliveries. At that time, the grocery stores delivered the groceries right to your house if you wanted it. And of course, there was always a lot of cleaning up, sweeping, dusting of shelves. At that time, I didn't wait on trade, on the customers. But then when that grocery store closed, I went to work for the A&P. It was called the A&P Tea Company at that time. And then I did anything from cashier to meat cutting to stocking shelves. And at that time, we also bought eggs from the farmers, so we had to check those over, and so some we sold, some we shipped back to the company, and they sold them in other stores. So we spent a lot of time in the grocery store beside waiting on customers. And then from there I went right into service.
What schools did you go to?
I started in Zeeland Public Schools in kindergarten. I went there through 6 grades. And then the 7th grade, I started in Zeeland Christian School, and I went there 7, 8, and 9. And at that time, they still had graduation. So after the 8th grade, not 7, 8, 6, 7, and 8. I'm sorry. It was grades 6, 7, and 8 that I went to Christian school. Then we did graduate from there, and they had a regular graduation ceremony, because that was all as high as that school went. Then from there, we went on to, I went on to the Zeeland High School, and I spent 4 years there, and I did graduate. That was in 1944, and this was after the war, of course, had been going on for some time already.
When did you meet your spouse?
Oh, that was after I came home from service. I went into service when I was 18. And I didn't get out for a couple of years, and then when I did, I spent quite a bit of time around before I finally got married. And I think it was in '53 when I finally got married And that was when I married May Zeidema, and that was the first time I got married. And then with her I had 4 kids, 4 children, and they're all 4 living today, and they're all within about 10 miles of home. So.
Okay. And what was your job when you got married?
Well, after I got out of service, my dad and my sister were both working at Mee Johnson, which was a baby food plant and a pharmaceutical maker in Zeeland. So I guess it just was almost normal. I went down there, applied for a job, and started the next day, because at that time help was scarce. So I started there, and I started taking in milk. We first stuck it in cans, and then eventually it evolved to a bulk, and we ended up taking milk in tanker trucks. But I spent 18 years there, and almost always in the milk receiving part of it. Then I left there because I had a chance to get a job in sales. I went to work for Wolverton. It was a Wolverton Incorporated. It was a wholesale distributor. And they still are in business. They're still selling pet supplies. And I called on shops all the way from Traverse City down to Battle Creek. And that was probably the happiest 25 years of my life, because it was doing something I enjoyed, and I really did like the pet business, and that's what I stayed in. I retired from there in 1990. So.
What do you do now?
I'm retired. I don't have to work anymore. I do, actually. I was retired for 10 years, and then I just got tired of sitting around the house, and I had a chance to get a job doing demonstrations and doing product research in grocery stores. And we put on demos, and we find out what products will sell and which products won't sell. So I do that a couple days a week. But basically, I'm retired. We traveled the country for a while, and then finally settled down for a winter home in Texas. And now we go there for 4 months, and we're back here for 8.
Do you belong to any organizations after the war?
On vacations?
No, like war veterans of America or whatever.
No, I never really got much into any of the conventions. My unit was a headquarters unit and really never got together at all with other units. I lost track of all the guys I was in service with when we got home, I think on purpose, because I met with one right after I got home and found out that we really had nothing left in common outside of service and what we did there. And you know, you can talk about that for 15 minutes, and from then on you just kind of look at each other. So I just kind of broke off everything with all the people that I was in service with.
Did you enlist, or were you drafted?
I got a letter from the draft board. It says, "Dear neighbor and friends, and you will report." So I ended up going to the draft board, and they put me on a truck and took me down to the camp, and that's where they swore me in. They did give me a choice. Everybody that went through, they asked what they wanted, and the guy ahead of me says, "I want to go in the Air Force," and the stamp came down. It said infantry. So the next one, he said he picked Navy, he got infantry, and the third one wanted something else, and he got infantry. So when they asked me where I wanted to go, I said, "I'd like to go in the infantry." And he hardly knew enough to stamp the paper. He was laughing so hard. But I got my wish.
Where were you living at the time?
I was living still home with the folks because I had just gotten out of high school. I'd only been out of high school for about 6 months. And then I was waiting all the time to be drafted, expecting to go already in the fall, and I didn't get in until March of next year.
What effect did where you were living have on your decision?
I had no choice. They drafted me and says, "You will report." So I was actually glad to go in. I had 3 brothers that were in, and I just figured it was my turn. So
What service branch were you in?
I was in the Army, in the infantry unit. In fact, it was the 4th Infantry when I finally got a place to be stationed. And I was stationed at that time in Manila.
Did you fight anywhere else besides Manila?
No, we were never fighting. I was drafted and I took basic training in Camp Croft, South Carolina. And then from there I went home for a 10-day vacation, or a furlough they called it at that time. From there I reported back to Alabama, and they sent us right across country to California. And the next week we found ourselves on a troop ship going to the Philippines. But in the meantime, while I was home on furlough, the war in Japan had ended. They had declared, they gave up anyhow. And so from then on, there wasn't a case of fighting, it was just a case of taking the place of those that had been doing the fighting, and that's what we did.
Do you recall your first few days in the service?
They were rather hectic. The first few days was a matter of getting shots, getting a haircut, and going through countless lectures on what was coming, which we found out never happened. But they threw an awful lot of information at us in the first few days, and then ended up shipping us out right away to basic training, where we had 12 weeks of basic training. So we really never had any permanent place then. We were just moving around and getting shots.
What surprised you the most about the first day?
I guess the regimentation of it would be the first thing that I thought of when we got into basic training, and into even before that. Every hour of every day was completely structured. You didn't have any choice of what you were going to do or where you were going to do it. They told you what time to get up, they told you where to be at what time, and they told you when to go to bed and when to shut up, and that was just about the way it went. It was very much of it was totally regimented. Even the basic training was, you got up before daylight and you went to bed at dark, and you were ready to sleep because you were tired. They really kept you busy.
Do you remember anything about your instructors?
Not most of them. Most of them seemed to be nice guys. There's only one that really stood out in my mind, and that was one that he had come back from European theater of war, and he was sent to us to tell us what happened and what we were supposed to do. And it was really sad because just about in the middle of our training, he was very despondent. In the middle of the training, he shot himself, and he was really a nice guy, and we all missed him. And that was kind of a shock to the whole unit when that happened.
During the first day, what were your feelings about the military?
Well, I didn't like it when I got in, and I didn't like it when I got out. I guess that's about all I can say about the military, except for the fact that I'm sure glad I went. I wouldn't give it up for the world, but I don't want to go back. It's a very strange world. It's so structured that a person has no choice of doing anything. It's a case of you're told in the morning exactly what to do, and you're told when to quit, and you're told when to eat and when to do this and that, and it's just not my type of world. I was used to a lot more freedom, and I was sure glad to have it back.
What experiences during boot camp stand out in your mind?
I guess the different cultures. We traveled in a lot of places at that time. I first ended up in the Philippines, and then we went to a little desert island. It was in New Guinea. It was a little bay called Finch Haven, New Guinea. It was a base where they had stored supplies, and they had traveled into the jungles to fight, which was, of course, done. But there were still people in there, and there was still Japanese were in the hills there. And we were just sitting on the edge of it, right along the shoreline. It was a base we closed. The Australians were on the other side of the river, and we had one half, they had the other half. And when we closed it, we had to take everything of ours out or destroy it. And it was just a shame, the waste in the military at that time. We ran good trucks, good Jeeps right over the cliff into the lake, or into the ocean, just to get rid of them, stuff we couldn't haul back. There was an awful lot of stuff was wasted, but with the rest we packed up and we took along back with us to the Philippines.
Can you recall any humorous boot camp stories?
Nothing I'd dare to talk about. The humorous stuff there was mostly pretty X-rated. It was a lot of even the jokes, the stuff we pulled on people was not kind of things that you'd really want to repeat. But I guess the strangest thing, I don't know if it was humorous, but it was strange to me. One of my first jobs when I got into the Philippines was guarding a garbage dump. Now, around here, we just don't understand what that means, but over there, it was a great big hole in the ground, and all the garbage trucks unloaded just like they would here, but nothing was covered up. And the women and children would clamber down the walls, and they would dig around in there and take what they needed out of it. And there they handed me a rifle, and I was supposed to shoot anybody that went down in there. Well, needless to say, that didn't get done. But it was really tragic to see them digging around in our garbage, which we threw away, and they thought they were really getting something when it came to food or even stuff they could use to fix things, and they'd haul almost anything back out they could.
What were your first reactions to the places you were sent?
I can say that again.
What were your first reactions to the places you were sent?
Well, it's a different culture we went to. It was a case of, but for myself, never really getting out of zone. And all of a sudden, I find myself on a troop ship ending up in a foreign country. The people talked a different language, of course. Some of them, a lot of them spoke English, the ones that were around the camp. The people live so much different, and it was hard for me to adjust first to believe that you could have a one-room shack and have 15, 16 people living in it and sleeping in it and eating in it. But one thing, over there, the temperature was usually mild. So a lot of things were done outside where we would have to cook inside, they would cook outside. So it was a way different world. And of course, when we got to the Philippines, or into the New Guinea, when we came into New Guinea, we were really shocked because you would see the family coming out of the hills, and you'd see a little, maybe 3 or 4 year old with a big basket on its head full of fruit and stuff they were going to sell. And there'd be maybe a dozen of them, and they would just keep going up a year apart or 2 years apart. And finally, mother would come, and she'd have a pack on her back, a baby in a sling on her chest, a great big basket on her head with things in it. And then following that, you'd see the father or the leader, and he would come swinging his cane and walking along completely carefree. He didn't have a thing to carry, and he had nothing to do with it. It just wasn't the kind of thing we were used to, and the culture that we were, brought up in at all, where the guy did a lot of the work and the woman took care of the kids all right, but they didn't make that much difference as it did there.
What did you think of fellow officers and soldiers?
Most of my officers that I had and most of the soldiers that I were with were very nice fellows. We had very little trouble. Of course, at that time, it was, again, different than it is now. There wasn't near the rebellion, near the problems. You were used to doing as you were told, and you took orders, and you lived a life that was pretty well balanced. The officers were very reasonable. In fact, excuse me, one of the officers I served was a lieutenant chaplain, and we went into town one day because we had to get the payroll. And I remember that so vividly because it just shocked me. We came into town in an open Jeep, and we went in and we got the payroll, which the Army at that time all paid everything in cash. And I don't know how many thousands of dollars there was in that thing, but there was a lot. And all of a sudden we got back in the Jeep and I was driving, and instead of getting in the other seat, he throws me his .45, his pistol, and he threw the package on the seat. And he says, "Go back, pay the men." He says, "I'm going to go get drunk." And he left me there with that kind of money in a strange city. It was something you don't forget too quick. But it all went well. I got back to the base, paid the men, and everybody was happy. So,
Did you make any close friendships while in the service?
we had a lot of close friends. I had one in particular. His name was Emil Anthony Persejueski. And every time we went anywhere, he'd introduce me, or I'd introduce him, and the first thing they'd say is, "How do you spell it?" Well, after a while, I finally learned it was P-R-Z-E-D-W-O-J-E-W-S-K-I. And you know, that was 60 years ago, and I never forgot it.
How did you entertain yourselves?
Well, there was always card games. There was an awful lot of poker. Everywhere you went, there was always a poker game going. A lot of it was just for pennies, but it was something to pass the time. We did have an officers' club, a non-commissioned officers' club. We would go to at night. They have some pool tables, ping pong tables, and things like that. The USO was very active. They had places where you could go in the evening and they had dances. They had different tables around, different things you could do. They didn't allow any gambling, of course, but there was always dances, and there was always movies. The base always had a movie going every night. Sometimes it'd be the same one 3 days in a row, but they always had them full anyhow, even if they'd seen it before. But that's about all the entertainment that we needed, because most of the time you were working until almost dark, and you had to get up early.
Did you pull any pranks on your officers?
That was a no-no. There was no pranks pulled on officers. The officers did not have a sense of humor. I do remember once when one was pulled, and he thought it was pulled. I was in night duty in the office, and the general's office girl called, and she was Filipino and didn't understand English too well. And when she called, she said that she wanted some lieutenant to report to lieutenant, or to this general, I don't remember his name, but some general anyway. And I said to her, well, okay, I would page him, and I did. I didn't ask him to come to headquarters. I told him to go see the general. About an hour later, I got another call from her and said they wanted the lieutenant to show up there. He hadn't come. So I says, well, I paged him before, I'll do it again. She misunderstood me and thought I said, what for? Why does he have to come in? It didn't take long, and there was the general, along with the MPs, who told my girl that they had to know what for before they would call him. Of course, I was puzzled, and I looked at him and I said, there wasn't anybody here that said that. So when he explained what happened, I explained what really I had said, and I says, I'm afraid she just misunderstood. Oh, he says, I already had your orders cut to send you out tomorrow, and I was about due to be going to a different job, and somewhere where it was strictly a physical labor. So I was mighty glad he at least believed me when I told him what really happened. But that was the problem with the language. So often they said things different than we did and just didn't understand what you were saying to them. And of course, when you had a superior officer, you didn't ask him what for. You did as he told you to do.
Did you have plenty of supplies?
Say that again?
Did you have plenty of supplies, like food?
Yes. We had all we wanted to eat there. There was always 3 meals a day, and they were I guess when looking back, they were good meals. We did a lot of grumbling. Of course, we ended up taking care of them ourselves. We had our KPs, and you got your time in there to work on it and get things fixed up and cook. There was always one cook and maybe an assistant, but the rest of it was all volunteers. Of course, the volunteers meant you, and you, so you didn't really get a chance to volunteer. But most of the food was at least nourishing. A lot of it was dried, a lot of it came out of cans. We had a lot of canned fruit, and we had a lot of dried, but we also did get some fresh meat, and a lot of that was cooked very good. We really couldn't complain of the meals.
How did you get your food?
It was just the Army mess. The food was all shipped in by boat, and it all went to the mess kits, all the mess halls, and the cooks would prepare it, and you ate at a certain time when they told you to. So all the food was brought in by ship or by air. Most of it was brought in by ship, because at that time air wasn't near as popular as it is today.
What did you do on leave?
Leave was really non-existent. We really didn't get a leave as such. We might get a few days off. When we were in the Philippines, we went up once to a place they called Camp John Hay. It was up above Manila in the mountains, and we went from sea level to 5,000 feet on trucks. And that was kind of an exciting drive, because you were running right around the edge of the mountain all the time. And if you met somebody, you had to find a pullout, maybe back up a ways to get to one. And sometimes the tailgate of the truck was kind of hanging, and you could look straight down for about 500 yards straight down, and you were just hoping you kept going. But that camp up there was very nice. They had everything up there. They had tennis, they had shuffleboard courts, and they had everything there that you could just do, and you could just lay around and rest. But it was the summer capital of the Philippines, and that's where we went to up there.
Did you feel any pressure or stress while in the camp?
Any what?
Any pressure or stress waiting to go to war?
Oh, not a lot of stress on a job like that. I was working in the office most of the time. After I got back in from New Guinea, got back into the Philippines, then they were reading on my record that I had taken typing in school, so they wanted me to go to work in the office. And I said, well, I just barely got by on typing, and well, you've got to take the test. So I took it, and next day I started in headquarters company. I started as a clerk there filing, and by the time I got out 9 months later, I was running the place. So it was a big turnover of help, so it didn't take too long to get changed to another job there.
Now, did you see combat?
No, the combat was done. Peace was declared when I was on leave after basic training. So combat, I saw what was left of it. I saw a lot of the damages of it. And they were actually still rooting out some of the Japanese soldiers out of the hills in the Philippines a couple of years later. But most of the actual combat was over. There was a lot of destruction, a lot of destroyed buildings in Manila.
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
Well, ribbons and medals, yeah. They got a list on my discharge. It said I had the Victory Medal, the Meritorious Unit Award, Asiatic Pacific Theater Ribbon, and the Philippine Liberation Ribbon, and of course the Good Conduct Medal. I was a good boy in service.
How did you get them?
Well, most of those were just from being there. When you were there at the right time, they issued those awards. The Philippine government declared everybody there during that period of time to have the Liberation Medal. So that's why we had it.
Were you ever injured?
Only once. That was in basic training. I fell off a log. They had a great big log across the ravine. It was wide enough. Should have been no trouble, but everybody was running, And just about the time the first one got in the middle, and I got about half or a third of the way, the sergeant hollered, "Quit running!" So everybody stopped. Well, I didn't stop fast enough, lost my footing, and I went down about 10 feet, landed on my pack, and I ended up in the hospital. But that was only a few days. That's the only injury I had.
How did your military experience influence your thinking about war?
Well, I didn't like war before, and I don't like it now, but I still think it's a necessary part of doing your country's job. If you're not going to fight for your country, there's not use in having one. And I think that was the main thing at that time. I don't think anybody really begrudged being in. And from what I hear even today, I've got a grandson that's in service now in the Marines going over, and he really feels that's part of the job that's got to be done. And it's just something we did because we had to. I don't think it was a case of, well, if they had been asked, would you go or wouldn't you go, I think we'd all gone. I don't think that changed.
Do you recall the day your service ended?
I was discharged on, I had the date here. I think it was December. Yeah, my discharge is dated December 21, 1946.
Where were you when you were discharged?
We got discharged out of Fort Chardon, Illinois, and from there on they just turned us loose and gave us a train ticket home. We had to find our own way there from there, but they kicked us out there, and we were ready to go.
What did you do in the days and weeks afterwards?
Celebrated. I had a few days after we got back where we had plenty of time to get back together with old friends, and there was a lot of them were already home. Some of them came home right after I did, and we spent a lot of time just kind of enjoying being back together again, taking up things that we hadn't done for years, like roller skating, and there was a lot of the winter sports that we hadn't done for a long time. So a lot of things we just went back into doing that we had done before.
Did you go back to work or did you go back to school?
I went right back to work when I got home. I don't think I had 3 weeks or 4 weeks off. And I went back to work, and I went to meet Johnson and applied for a job, and I was started the next week already. So I really didn't have a lot of time off at all. I didn't need that. I needed the money at that time because I didn't have a car when I went in, and of course I wanted a car, so I went right to work.
You say you didn't join any veteran organizations. Why didn't you join them?
I joined the Veterans of Foreign Wars soon after we got home. Probably mainly that one instead of the American Legion because they had a clubhouse in Holland. And these were all people that were overseas when I was, or at least somewhere overseas. So a lot of the people there, I had more to talk about than I would have in the Legion, although I had nothing against the Legion as an organization, but I didn't want to belong to both of them, so I picked the VFW. And I'm still a lifetime member there. I don't get there very often anymore, but I still belong to the Veterans of Foreign Wars.
What does your post or association do?
The Veterans of Foreign Wars is especially interested in legislation. Anything that will help the veterans. They're working on the hospitals and things like that in order to get better service for the veterans that were in. Not only the Veterans of Foreign Wars, but all veterans. And they do a lot of good in that. They also are very visible around here. You'll see them running the honor guard at the tulip time parades. They also send the honor guard to all military funerals, and they do a nice job of that.
Do you enjoy being a member?
I did. When I was active in it, I really did enjoy the Veterans of Foreign Wars, mostly because of the comradeship, the fact that it was people that you could talk to about things that you just didn't talk to others because they didn't have any idea what you went through. And it was a group where you could get together, you could get a drink, and you could talk. There was also a place to play cards and a place to dance and things like that. They do still have a nice organization in Holland.
How did the service and experiences in the service affect your life?
I think it made me grow up fast. I went in service when I was 18. I came out 2 years later at about 35, it felt. It gave me a way different perspective on life than I had before. I think it's just a case of where you really grow up fast because you have to. You don't have anybody to depend on. You have to take care of yourself. And I think it makes a vast influence in your life only because it's just something so different. You can't. School is one thing, but when you get into service, you were away from everybody and everything you were used to. And you just either grew up or you went to pieces. And most of us grew up pretty good.
Do you have anything else to add that I haven't asked you about?
No, service has been, of course, a big part of the life, but I think mostly after that it has even affected a lot of my daily life. After you see what some people went through in service, you saw how some of them died, you saw how some of them came back all crippled. You realize how good God has been to you and how you really came through everything unscathed. Even though the war itself was over, there was still a lot of dangers around. There was still a lot of chances for accidents and, yeah, even some shooting around. So it kind of makes you look at life a little different than when you're just first out of school. And it made me appreciate some of the jobs I had. I think even some of the training in the service, the regimentation, and the fact that you got used to taking orders helped a lot when I had a job and things that I had to do. So, yeah, I think basically, if anything, service just was a case of where I grew up and I learned what I had to do and what I couldn't do, and that you got to learn to depend on others, that you can't do it all yourself. You've got to trust somebody else to be alongside you or behind you watching your back. And you don't just figure you're going to do it all yourself. You don't stand alone. I think that was the biggest thing that service did for me.
Well, thank you for coming to the interview.
Okay.
Question. You said your two brothers, or I think two brothers, were also in
Yes, I had.
forces, and did you correspond with them, or what happened to them?
Well, when I was in service, of course, my brothers were just about ready to come out. My oldest brother is about 8 years older than I am, and he went into service early. He was injured in Italy and finally ended up working there on the docks because he could no longer be in service as far as fighting goes. My other brother was in England, and he was servicing the planes that flew over Germany every night. So they were just about ready to come home when I went in, and everybody says, "Oh, you'll beat them out yet. You'll be discharged before they are." Well, it didn't turn out that way because I ended up going overseas, and they just came home. But I think a lot of the letters that I got from them before I went in kind of prepared me for service, because they told me what to expect, what not to do, and a lot of times how to get along. So a lot of the things that they told me were very useful when I went in. And I used a lot of the knowledge that they gained to help me through without getting in trouble.
Anybody else have a question?
Others? Okay, if you guys want to stop your tapes for a moment.
The following oral military history project is a series of documentaries in association with the Lowell area men and women who proudly served and sacrificed part of their lives to preserve the opportunities for all of us to build our businesses and raise our families under a blanket of freedom. For reservations and more information, contact the Lowell Area Historical Museum at 616-897-7688.